Good afternoon. Great to be here. A couple of comments, I guess, and then open it up for Q&A.
Agreeing to a policy on immigration is that the Democrats don't want security.
Well, you know, I mean, they're the big ones. Actually, we get a nuclear threat from North Korea, a possible nuclear threat in time by the Iranians. You know, probably the biggest threat, the biggest concern, and it's not an immediate concern, if this continues in North Korea, if eventually other countries, I'll let it go at that, become nuclear powers. Obviously, we already have some out there. There'll be a real impetus for a lot of countries to develop or buy nuclear weapons.
President, in support of pulling out of UNESCO, what would the president?
The partners in the region we're very close with, great relationships with. We're out there. We have footprints on the ground, naval and air forces there, to just demonstrate our resolve, our friendship, and to try to deter anything that any country out there may do. So that's the approach we're taking to Iran right now. Clearly, the president has he's deep in thought, to say the least, about way ahead in Iran. And once again, he's not the only one that thinks that maybe the deal that was struck under the previous administration is a deal that, in the long term, even in the medium and long term, will protect America.
Just going into that, do you have any statement about, in light of UNESCO pulling out?
I enjoyed reading about it tomorrow. Thanks a lot, everyone.
President should lose their license, sir.
Will he or won't he certify the Iran nuclear deal? All eyes on President Trump as he prepares to make a crucial speech later, which could make or break the historic agreement. The deal saw sanctions eased on Tehran in exchange for curbs on its nuclear activity. International inspectors say Iran is in technical compliance with the accord, but Trump has threatened to tear it up, branding it the worst deal the US has ever signed. More recently, the president has claimed Iran is in violation of the spirit of the agreement, which is signed with 6 world powers in July 2015. Both Britain and France have urged Trump to stay inside the deal, as have senior advisers within his administration, such as Defence Secretary James Mattis. The president has until Sunday to make a decision. If he refuses, Congress will have 60 days to decide whether to reimpose sanctions on Iran, a move which many fear could not only doom the deal, but also risk retaliation from Tehran.
Of the story in most of the Iranian media here, and also that we've heard that the head of Iran's atomic energy organization, Mr. Salehi, yesterday he stressed that Iran seeks to preserve the deal, but it's not at any price. And he also mentioned that now Iran is prepared to different scenarios of the U.S. Coming withdrawal of the deal. And it seems the decision makers inside Iran that they are still seeks to remain in the deal, but they are also prepared for the responses. But some of the analysts here have told me that Iran definitely will give a firm response to the U.S., but this response will be carefully considered and will not violate, in a condition will not violate the deal. So this is the situation here.
Repudiation of the Iran deal was a central promise of the Trump electoral campaign.
And I'm disgusted. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And by the way, be careful, because we made Iran a real power. We gave them $150 billion. Now think of it. Think of it.
The crowd boos, almost certainly unaware that wasn't the case. The sum of money released in terms of the deal was in fact Iran's own funds that had been frozen by previous sanctions.
We didn't get anything. We got nothing.
During his first months in office, President Trump had to acknowledge the fact that Iran was complying with its side of the deal, formally certifying so on 2 occasions. But the US ambassador to the United Nations has apparently been at the forefront of finding a way in which the president could fulfill his campaign promise, coming up with the argument that Iranian compliance was not the only thing that need be certified.
We owe it to ourselves to look at every aspect of this deal and understand that this was a flawed deal, and understand that this flawed deal has negative consequences as well.
This argument that other factors such as US national interest should be taken into account, rejected by other signatories to the deal.
The agreement is about nuclear. Nuclear is fulfilled. The agreement is delivering.
Made clear too the fact that the US cannot take unilateral action without Security Council consensus, the deal being signed by the 5 permanent members along with Germany, known as the P5+1.
همه اون 5 تا کنار جمهوری اسلامی ایران هستن.
All members of the P5+1 stand in line with Iran, except that one. Russia, China, 3 European countries, the whole EU, and hundreds of countries. They are all standing with Iran.
Perhaps the real interest of President Trump is not the deal itself, but the perceived political and personal need to meet one of his campaign promises. If so, President Trump could pay a long-term cost for the short-term satisfaction of his right-wing support base, not least the dilution of trust in US commitment to international agreements, the fracturing of relationships with traditional allies, and the possible, if not probable, repudiation of a Security Council, whose authority would be disdainfully flouted by a founding member. Mike Hanna.
Obama administration's great gift to a new world disorder. You have to remember, the president ordered an Iran review back in April. The present law requires the president to certify every 90 days that Iranians are in compliance with the Obama administration's so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, as they call it, or as John Kerry called it, the Iranian deal. And it's supposed to also confirm that it's in U.S. national interest. The Iranian nuke deal is worse for the American people than Obamacare. They can both kill you. It's just a matter of how many and how fast.
So
it's a very bad deal.
We don't like the fact that they can still shoot off ballistic missiles. We don't like the fact that they don't renounce terrorism. But do we have proof that they're breaking it? And I talked to Joe Lieberman yesterday, who hates this deal, and he says they're not letting the International Atomic Energy inspectors into the military sites to test.
Right.
We can't get the inspectors in like we did in Iraq. We're counting on them to test themselves.
We've only got a few seconds left, but here's 4 reasons why it's such a bad deal. First, there are so many loopholes and sunset provisions and blind spots that the Iranians can be, quote, in compliance with the deal by funding and working with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on nuclear weapons and ICBMs. Number 2, there are no consequences in this so-called deal for Iranian noncompliance. The snapback provisions that were so talked about are ludicrous from the start. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps runs their nuclear program, and it bars the international inspectors from getting into the military sites. Number 3, the Kerry deal, which is what it really is, makes no mention of other Iranian bad behavior. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds forces running amok in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain, Yemen, and Sudan. No holds barred. The Iranians hold American hostages. Robert Levinson, missing for 10 years.
Gotcha.
We just got Zi Wang, got a 10-year sentence. And we got another father-son couple that are being held over there. Negotiating a revised deal can get Congress fully invested with this.
Right.
And all that's the kind of thing that we need to pay attention to. By the way, I appreciate you mentioning war stories this weekend on our sister or brother network, FBN. That's thanks to the great War Stories team that we've had now for 102 episodes of military documentaries that are better than anything on PBS or Ken Burns.
And Trump is expected to ask Congress to amend or completely remove legislation language from the deal that requires the president to certify Iranian compliance every 90 days. Much of the right, though, is likely to agree, but President Trump has found some unlikely support from the left as well.
I oppose the deal. I voted against the deal. Mr. Sullivan, I say this with respect and gratitude for your hard work to bring Iran to the negotiating table. But I felt the sunset provisions left too short a time before Iran could become a legitimate nuclear power.
And many were expecting the president to make the announcement earlier today, but instead he sent out his Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, to field reporter questions during the White House daily press briefing.
Clearly, the president has, he's deep in thought, to say the least, about the way ahead in Iran. And once again, he's not the only one that thinks that maybe the deal that was struck under the previous administration is a deal that in the long term, even in the medium and long term, will protect America.
Now, this in spite of European allies, Germany, France, and Great Britain, all urging the president to keep the accord intact and to simply fix what he sees as flaws in the deal. France, though, is willing to tackle some issues with the so-called sunset clauses that'll allow Iran to begin ramping up its enrichment capabilities after 10 years of the agreement, as well as ending some arms embargoes. But German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel has spoken out to press saying this, quote, "We'll also have to tell the Americans that their behavior on the Iran issue will drive us Europeans into a common position with Russia and China against the USA."
Tooth Fairy is going to come and get better inspections inside Iran. After 2 years of Obama administration negotiations, they couldn't get it. It's not going to happen. I really think the president's advisors have put him in a bad place. I think this everything that's reported will be a mistake to decertify under this misbegotten Corker-Cardin legislation, but stay in the deal when this is announced tomorrow. What will be the difference on Saturday from where we are today? Nothing. The deal is in place, and as long as it's in place, it empowers Iran to get nuclear weapons. This is not something that can be fixed by tinkering around the edges of the deal. The core provisions of the deal that allow Iran to continue any uranium enrichment are fundamentally flawed. And the only way to break out is to get out of the deal. The Europeans aren't going to like it. Of course they're not going to like it. Obama and the Iranians planned it to put golden handcuffs on the Europeans. More trade, more investment. That does what? Strengthen Iran. Another reason to break the deal.
Yeah. I had a feeling you were going to say something like that. You know, what are the other options at this point? I mean, people always bring up when Israel struck back in 1981, and you have to think that if we look at a map of where the reactors were and where we think they might be now, we have some nice graphics for you there. I mean, is it possible to do something like this? Could Israel act on its own? I mean, what are some of the other options out there?
No, I think Israel could easily do this and probably should have about 10 years ago. What worries me more than anything else is that Iran and North Korea have moved beyond their 20-year cooperation on ballistic missiles and are cooperating on the nuclear side of this, and that a fair amount of Iran's nuclear activities are buried under a mountain in North Korea. The Europeans, frankly, are not the biggest problem here. I think Russia and China are problems as well. They don't see Iran's nuclear capability as a problem for them. They see it as a problem for us. And I think they're going to continue to trade and assist Iran, whether this deal stays in place or not. I think it's delusional to think that Iran...
The Iranian nuke deal is worse for the American people than Obamacare. They can both kill you. It's just a matter of how many and how fast.
For more on this, former Assistant Secretary of Defense Larry Korb joins us on the phone. Larry is also a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Good morning, Larry. We just got the news from the Trump administration. What exactly do you think the president will do here?
Well, basically, what he is doing under the law, every 90 days he has to certify that Iran is complying with the deal. Essentially, what he says is, I'm really not going to certify that they're complying with the deal, not because they're not complying with the deal, but because of all their other behavior in the region.
We just heard that soundbite from Oliver North. Why is this deal, the Iranian deal as it stands now, why is it so bad?
Well, it is not bad. Actually, it is one of the best arms control agreements we've ever had, much better than when I worked with President Reagan that we had with then the Soviet Union and now Russia. And I think what's happened, we've taken our mind off, our focus off the deal about nuclear weapons and then talked about a whole bunch of other issues. We can still do both. And in fact, that's what our European allies work with us to get the nuclear deal, because that's the biggest threat to the region because of Iran were to get nuclear weapons, and the Saudis would do, and you'd have a nuclear arms race in that part of the world.
So we're going to see changes to the deal then?
Well, again, we're not quite sure. This almost gives us the worst of all possible worlds, because you say, well, we're not going to certify you're complying with it, even though the International Atomic Energy says that we are. On the other hand, he's not telling Congress in this thing, the way I read it, that, you should, put the sanctions back on. So what have you got? You've got a lot of confusion here. And, in fact, what could happen economically is our European allies, Russia and China, could benefit more economically because they can do more business with Iran. I mean, one of the deals is in jeopardy now. What about the Boeing was going to sell, all the planes to Iran? Will that deal go through now?
Mm-hmm. All right, Larry Korb, thank you so much. And, of course, we're going to see how our European allies and also how Iran responds to the president's formal announcement when we get it later today. Larry, thank you.
The United States is that this Iran deal was not just a bilateral agreement between Iran and the United States, nor was it merely a multilateral agreement between, say, the Europeans, the United States, and Iran. This was a deal that was actually ratified by the UN Security Council in 2015 in UN Security Council Resolution 2231. So this is a deal which has the imprimatur of international law, as it were, as far as the Security Council is concerned. And all agencies, through the various annexes of this deal, have so far said that Iran is maintaining its end of the bargain. So it's not that easy for the American government to say that Iran is in violation, and it's even more difficult, it seems to me, for the American government to walk away from a deal which has been sanctified by a Security Council resolution.
Vijay, you wrote that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the U.S. government was committed to overthrowing the current government in Iran by peaceful means. So is Washington's real intentions to pursue regime change in Iran?
Well, it's been the American position since 1979 that the current government in Iran is illegitimate, and it's attempted through various means to overthrow this government. I mean, there's been no change in policy since 1979, whether it's been a Democratic administration or a Republican administration. We can say that the tempo or the attempts to overthrow Iran have had a different kind of feeling under different administrations, but the broad policy exists. Now, what Tillerson said is quite interesting. He made a distinction between forcible regime change and peaceful regime change. Look, as far as the Iranians are concerned, as far as the United Nations is concerned, as far as international law is concerned, there is no distinction between peaceful regime change and forcible regime change. Both of them essentially are against the sovereignty of the people of Iran.
Vijay, in your opinion, how much does Israel's animosity towards Iran have to do with Trump decertifying the Iran deal, given his close relationship to Netanyahu?
It's very clear that the Europeans are uncomfortable with this attempt to decertify Iran. After all, Europe relies on energy from Iran. Its sources of energy in Russia have been cut off. Its sources of energy from Libya have been compromised. So the European partners are not interested in decertifying Iran and going back to a position of sanctions. The Israelis are very interested in such a policy, largely because Israel sees Iran as a major strategic problem in the region. So it's, should be fairly clear, therefore, that the United States is following, as it were, the Israel advice regarding Iran and not the European advice. So certainly Israel is playing a major role in the Trump White House on this rather irrational policy regarding Iran.
Vijay, Iran's missile program is to deter foreign aggression, especially as it is encircled by U.S. bases in Bahrain, Afghanistan, and Israel. Now, is this deterrent capability one that worries Israel? But, I mean, don't all nations have the lawful right to basic self-defense and deterrent capabilities?
Well, in my opinion, there should be, for instance, a nuclear-free zone around the world. I would like to see no nuclear bombs anywhere. I'd like to see a nuclear-free zone in West Asia. Iran could, and I think has often said that it would be a party to a nuclear-free zone agreement. Israel is the only nuclear power, weapons power in the region, and refuses to come to the table for any Middle East nuclear-free discussion. So here, I think the Iranians are on some solid ground when they say they would like some sort of missile shield to protect Iran from aggression. After all, Iran has not attacked countries in the region in its history, in the modern history. Iran was attacked by Iraq, backed by the Gulf Arab states in 1980. Iran has been attacked by others, but it has not gone out and attacked other countries. It has participated in wars outside its own territory, as it's now participating in both Iraq and Syria. But there the Iranians argue they are doing so with the invitation of those countries. So Iran's missile policy it suggests a defensive policy. It might make sense if you see that its adversary in the region, Israel, refuses to demilitarize on the nuclear front and create a nuclear-free Middle East.
All right, Vijay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your insight. That was author, historian, and director of international studies at Trinity College.